This is Fernando Guerra, Professor and Director at Loyola Marymount University. Welcome to the campus for our annual Fall Lecture Series. Today we have Mayor Sally Zuniga Flowers with us. She is the Mayor of Artesia and has been elected official in Artesia since 1997. Okay, we're going to talk about local government and the role of local government, not only in politics, but in economic development. First of all, though, Sally, wanted to talk to you about 1997, and you ran for Artesia City Council. What prompted you to run for City Council? What was it that made you think that, number one, you could run, win, and then govern?
Okay. My parents were elderly at the time, and an issue came before us. And in regard to land use, it was actually redevelopment was coming to our city. And so they had gone to the city council meetings. They were unable to understand. They couldn't grasp it. So they asked me if I would begin going with them, and I did. And then as we sat there and we watched the men up there, was all 5 men, and my mom was telling me, "You can do this," and I said, "Oh, I could never do this." And she said, "You can do it. I know you can." Well, there were a lot of accounting issues because of the contracts and budgets, finance, all that type of thing. My background's accounting. And so I felt I grasped it better than the men that were up there, the current elected. So at the last minute, I ran, and I won by 6 votes.
6 votes. So now every vote counts, man.
I know that.
We always talk about, hey, it doesn't matter whether you vote or not. Everybody's going to win by 1,000, 200,000, or something like that. But at the local city council, it's not unusual that someone wins by 6 votes, right. 20 votes, something like that. So had you worked one less day at knocking doors or something like that, you might not have won.
Oh, the day of the election, we were making phone calls. My aunts, my uncles, they were over at the house. They were making phone calls, and my aunt got off the phone. I still remember this, and she said, "There's 6 voters in that house," and she said, "I told them, you all need to go." In the end, I won by 6 votes, so my Aunt Mary says, I won the election for you.
She delivered the votes, right?
She delivered, yeah.
So Artesia, talk a little bit about the city of Artesia. It's kind of small in terms of the county. We have 88 cities in the county of Los Angeles. It's probably one of the smaller cities.
It is, but it's one of the most important.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. The city of Artesia is one of the most diverse cities in the world. And for smaller cities, I'm going to say under 50,000, we're number 1. In
terms of diversity?
Diversity. We have 49 out of the 51 major languages that are spoken there. And as percentiles go, you kind of reverse it, but we're in the 1 percentile of diversity. So you could look at it the 99%, but yeah.
It's just pretty amazing. But it's a small community. I mean, in terms of square miles, it's
not even 2 square miles.
It's not even 2 square miles. That's like, you can run that in the morning. I mean, barely at me. Some of the students here, that would be no problem. You talked about being an accountant. While you were serving on the city council, it's a part-time job. Okay, you have to have another job, or someone in the household has to have another job. But in addition to doing that, the governor also appointed you to a board of accountancy. What does that board do, and why did you decide to take on a 3rd responsibility?
Well, without going too much into it, I ran for assembly, and I was unsuccessful. And I wanted to be involved, in government at the state level. And so what I did was I applied for, with the governor's office, for a commission. I did not have accounting down. I had other things like local government. There were water, because I was very involved in water, but different things. And I was thinking that accounting would be boring. And so that I didn't put that down.
Wait a minute, you're an accountant.
I know, that's why I knew. And so anyway, so what happened was then I got a call from the governor's office, asked me to fly up on my own dime, which is fine, and to find out what my commission was. And as I walked up the steps of the Capitol, I did not know.
What he was going to appoint you to?
No, I had no idea, and I really didn't know the questions they were going to ask me, and so I was nervous. And so I got in there, and then they told me it was the California Board of Accountancy. And the thing is, my first thought was, oh, how boring. But really what it is the regulatory board for all CPAs and CPA firms in the state of California. It is very controversial. There were a lot of issues that came before us on that board, and it was anything other than boring. And I served there for 5 years under 2 governors. And then from that
But I have
level,
to emphasize to the students, they weren't paying her much.
No. It's $100 per meeting.
And the meetings last all day, so it's basically minimum wage.
Yeah, right. Right. And ours were, California, a lot of times we had them 2 days. They were 2 days worth. And yeah, no, you lost money from work, and people who own their own businesses lost money.
Right.
You know, doing it, but it just became a passion. Well, then I was elected to the national board, and that was the California, it was the national, NASBA, National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, and I served there for 5 years. But the significance of that one is that it was it was at a national level, but we also influenced the state boards, and so
by setting national standards.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. And most of the states would follow. The two states that were most reticent to follow anything, you know, that the board came up with was California and New York. We found those were the two.
Yeah, because they think they're unique, that
Exactly.
nothing applies to them, that, you know,
Exactly.
et
They're
cetera.
pioneers and.
Yeah.
Right.
So you have this state appointment that pays nothing,
Correct.
or $100. You are a council member in Artesia that pays nothing, or
correct.
what is it, $500, $700 a month or something like that?
$550.
$550 a month, you know, with about how many hours do you spend being mayor of Artesia?
It depends on the week, but a lot of hours. There's quite a few hours. You know, I would say 20 hours a week go into that.
Okay, so then you have to have family time, and then you have to have another job.
Right.
And so how do you manage all the different hours?
Well, it didn't stop there. That's the whole thing. I was mayor or on council. I was on the State Board of Accountancy. Part of the time I was in the national board while I was on the state. I was also part of the League of California Cities Latino Caucus.
Right.
And I was president of California Contract Cities Association. I was on the Sanitation District Board, the Vector Control Board, and the LA County Library Commission. And then all of a sudden, one day towards the end of a year, because a lot of the commissions, you either re-up or not re-up kind of towards the end of the year, you know, October, November, December time, I said I can't do this anymore. So I guess lesson learned, you will burn out, you know, if you do that many hours, but I didn't get paid for any of them.
Right. But it's about civic duty.
It was about oh yeah, and networking.
It's about being a person for others, which is the Jesuit motto here at Loyola Marymount University, that you're supposed to, you have the education, you have the ability to serve, and that's what you've been doing. Right. Talk about California Contract Cities, because last week we had Mayor Mario Guerra from the city of Downey, and he is the president of the Independent Cities Association. You were on the board of the California Contract Cities Association. What's the difference between the two of them?
Okay, so ICA, or Independent Cities Association, typically has the non-contracting cities, and then California Contract Cities Association, which of course our city is so small that we contract out fire, you know, our sheriff department, all of our utilities, everything is contracted out. And so that association typically ends up being the smaller ones. Well, what happened was we started working with LA and Long Beach because they're with us. Most of our issues overlap. Even the bigger cities like, for example, well, even Downey, ICA, they're in independent cities. They have their own police department. They have their own fire department. However, they belong, and then many of our cities belong to them. So there's a lot of crossover. Also with League of California Cities, but California Contract Cities, there are usually typically 70 to 80 cities that are members of that. And so when you look at how many people that those cities represent, there's over 10 million people. I mean, there's just millions of people. So when we go up to Sacramento, and we have all these statistics that are down, the legislators listen when they hear how big, you know, it's not just my little city that's less than 2 square miles. Suddenly we become a force that they want to listen to.
Because you face a lot of the same issues that other cities that contract.
Right.
So contract cities are basically just what the name implies. You are contracting out for most of the public services that the city has. Most importantly, police. And so instead of having your own police force, you have the county sheriffs. You do a contract with the county sheriffs. So you don't necessarily have to do that. Some cities actually contract with other city departments. So I believe Santa Fe Springs, for instance, contracts with Whittier Police. And so it's just meaning that you're not going to have your own police force. And the same with fire, that you don't have your own fire department. You contract with county fire. And then sometimes with trash collection, like the city of LA, it has its own employees going out and collecting the trash. In Artesia, you contract that out to a private vendor. So that's the whole idea. And then these cities get together to talk about that experience and to talk about how to best contract, what the best practices are, et cetera. So when you think about Artesia, who are some of the neighbors that are around that city?
Artesia is in what we call the horseshoe of Cerritos. So the city of Cerritos surrounds Artesia almost fully. But at the top of the horseshoe, Norwalk, the city of Norwalk is there. So we have two cities that surround us.
So let me ask you some questions that we're going to be asking other mayors throughout a survey that we've been putting together. Okay. What do you think is the most important issue facing residents in your city today?
Crime suppression, reduction of crime. That's the first thing that anybody talks about. I'm actually running for re-election right now, and so I'm knocking on doors, and I always ask them, what's important to you? And they want to be safe. They want to be safe. It's not even the potholes anymore. In the old days, it was the potholes. And really, our crime went way down. And then we've had a spike in it.
Okay, so I was going to ask whether it was a perception or the reality, because crime throughout America has been declining. Crime, even in the major urban areas like Los Angeles and New York, has been declining. There are different cases like Oakland. They've talked about right now, Oakland, the crime is really spiked up. So when you take a look at the objective numbers, the number of arrests and the actual crimes reported, is crime increasing in Artesia?
We've had a spike. If you were to compare this year to last year, it's increased.
Now, what causes
that? It's not just us.
What do you think is causing that?
I think that part of it was when the economy was down, people were desperate for money. People don't have jobs. They have to feed, their families, and they have to feed their drug addictions, whatever's going on at the time. But it has happened. And in fact, we put more resources towards our patrolling, I guess I would say, in the city of Artesia to try to mitigate some of the spike that's occurring right now.
You mentioned the economy declining. What can local elected officials do to improve the city's economy? What powers do you individually and a council as a whole have to help the city's economy?
Well, what we've done in our city that I think has worked really well is that we went into partnership mode. And this was with community partners, with businesses, the merchants along our downtown corridor. We have an enclave of Indians there, and so anybody that lives in our area, and actually the Indians come from Glendale and Burbank and San Diego and from all over the place.
When you say Indians, you're talking about subcontinent Indians, not Native Americans.
Southeast Asian Indians,
right.
From India.
As a matter of fact, they call Artesia Little India.
Yes, they do. And so what we have done is create, and in fact we're up for an award right now. We're a finalist for most business friendly. So what we did was we started having meetings with the merchants to find out what do you need, and the city started partnering with them. And so for example, we've got some huge vibrant banners that are going up and down Pioneer Boulevard and putting lights up, and we did a whole meeting with, so we've been doing a lot of enhancements in the public right-of-way that they're not paying for. I mean, in other words, all that, it's the money that's coming into the city, and we get grants from the state, from EDA, from the federal, and but it's helping our businesses out, and they recognize that.
So you kind of touched on this a little bit, but what makes a city business friendly?
To me, reaching out and listening to the businesses. If there's a disconnect between the city and the business, they're on their own, in the city. So what we've tried to do, and we actually have a fairly new city manager who is very well versed in economic development, and he has a lot of ideas and a lot of vision, and it's completely changing. We even have business improvement program to help the businesses to enhance their facade, remodel the front. And then we partner with them, because what's going to happen is that brings up our downtown, right? And then, but it also helps their business. They end up paying it back slowly over time, where they can afford. They couldn't do it through a bank, so a lot of our mom and pops would not be able to do that. So we're trying to work with them on that.
So which sector in your city is most essential for economic growth over the next 5 years? When you think about a particular sector, is there one that's really important to Artesia?
It's, in my opinion, it is our downtown corridor. Because as far as, and I saw it on there, it's not manufacturing, it's not manufacturing, it's retail.
Retail.
Right.
And then specifically what you talked about is the Indian influence. When you're talking about that, so the number of Indians that live in Artesia is actually not that great,
No.
but the number of businesses that are owned by Indians is substantial.
Right.
What is the history of that? How did that happen that Indians decided to start opening shop in Artesia?
From what I understand, it was a woman named Mala Malani who came to Artesia and set up a spice. It was a little kind of a grocery store, spice store. And then, so then the, I'm going to say the South Asian people who wanted this type of spice would come to her. And then she started doing some clothing. And then another and she became successful. And somebody saw that was from India and said, you know what? And so then they opened shop. And then another one opened shop. And our downtown really was dead at that point. It was dead. So the rent was low. You know, we had a lot of vacancies, easy for them to move in. And then when people started coming, it just grew. And then our rents were so high for Artesia that it's like $3. It was $3 a square foot when, if you went to a local city, which is more affluent than ours, it would be $2 or $2.50. So, I mean, but it was because they wanted to be there, and they're very successful.
But that's not an unusual phenomenon. For instance, when I think about automobile dealerships, and they're like always right next to each other, or gas stations. You know, you drive for miles and you don't see one, then all of a sudden you come to a corner and there's four, one on each station. And so oftentimes they're driven in terms of competition to being right next to each other. So because they feed off of each other. And I think that's what kind of occurred, and it drove up the rents, and then only to those that it made sense to be there, which then further allowed for more Indian businesses to be there. It's actually quite an interesting ethnic business history that occurred. What are the top 5 cities in Los Angeles County that you believe compete with Artesia for economic development?
Okay, that's a hard one for Artesia because we're so small. We are. If I had to say who was competing with us, it would be simply the cities that are local to us, because there's not really a large enclave of Indians, you know, again, Southeast Indians in LA County like there is in Artesia. Right. So in other words, we have that market. You know, they're starting to pop up a little bit in other places, but not to our extent. So.
But think about it this way, that if you wanted to branch out and diversify and not be so dependent on the subcontinent Indians, and you wanted to go after other businesses, what type of businesses would you go after that would then compete with other cities? And what cities would that be?
Well, what we're looking for, I'm going to say Cerritos, because Cerritos is right around us. And if there is, let's just say, a national chain restaurant and they come in, do they want to be in Artesia or do they want to be in Cerritos? They want to be in Cerritos. I mean, we know that. And so what we're trying to do at this point is start it. You know, in other words, just like we did with the Indian, with the Indian community, to start to bring, and we do have a new development that's very successful in the city of Artesia, and actually it's so successful that they're trying to buy another development, a corner, so that they can do the same thing. And really, for businesses, everybody, and the perception is there that the number one ethnic owner of businesses in Artesia are the Southeast Asian Indians. It's not. It's Asians.
In general.
In general. And but the difference is they're all over. I mean, there's in Cerritos, and there's a lot of places in, you know, Southern California that you can find Asian food, Asian market. You know you know, those wares, and our Asian stores are dispersed throughout the city. Little India is a corridor, and they're just, you know, the street is lined.
Right. Now, you've already touched on some of this as well, but what are some of the policies that your city is pursuing to help develop your economy?
To help develop the economy, I had a list that I have at home of things that we're doing because I'm working with the city manager. As mayor, we came up with some goals. But basically, again, it's to, we're trying to, recruit new businesses to the city of Artesia. We're trying to help this developer that wants to, in other words, assist them. And the city can do things, like help with permitting, help to expedite, the plan check. And so we have some things in place that help businesses if they do come in. Again, we are doing enhancements that we've never done in the past, while I was on. And I think you can see a difference downtown, in the downtown corridor. Again, we're having meetings with the businesses, but that's basically what we're doing.
So is there one key project in which the city is currently engaged that really captures how you envision the city in the future?
Well, okay. I mean, for right now, we have 2.7 million. We have a couple different pots of money that we're putting together to create a downtown. We did what was called Phase 1 on Pioneer Boulevard, which is where our downtown corridor is. And then now we're going to finish it from 183rd Street all the way to South Street, which is, it's not even a mile at that point. But we're putting in even pipe music and the string lights across the street and some landscaping. Kind of like
beautification projects.
Exactly. And so that's what we're trying to do, is make that more. We are also bringing in a new theater. It's an Indian.
Oh,
theater.
Bollywood.
Bollywood is going to be downtown, which is going to bring people in, and it'll make it a destination spot that, they'll come for the movies and shop and go to dinner and, or lunch. And so that's the vision there.
So last year, the state of California and Governor Jerry Brown got rid of redevelopment agencies. So what's your city doing to try to replace redevelopment agencies?
Well, our city had a large bond in place. And when they stopped the redevelopment, we had streets were dug up. They were dug, and it was dangerous. And they stopped the money. We had no money to finish them. And so we were putting barricades and cones. I mean, it was not done well, I'm going to say, by the state. In other words, they didn't give us the leeway.
Didn't the law allow for you to finish projects that were underway?
No. It did not. We were unable. Everything was frozen. And then what happened was we asked if we could have our bond money back, which was, I don't know, between $3 and $4 million, and they said no. The state said no, which the bond, we did that without the state. In other words, we went out to the people, we did a bond, and it was a $12 million bond, nothing to do with the state of California, and they froze that even. And so then we had attorneys, there's so many lawsuits, against the state for what they did. But then they released it, so we're getting the money back. It just took a while.
So if there was one regulation that you think needs to be repealed by the state or federal government, what would that regulation be and make life easier for you as a council member and for the city of Artesia?
Well, for me, and I'm going to say, because this is what we hear from contract cities also, is local control, and if they'll just leave us alone. In other words,
local control, but there is no one regulation at the state that governs local control. There's so many of them that prohibit you from doing certain things.
Okay, so you want me to...
Yeah, if there was one that you thought about, I mean, like, that would say, that would free you up in one particular area. If you had like a magic wand that can change one regulation.
Well, it's controversial. And I'll probably hear about it.
All right.
I was going to say, I'll probably hear about it if I say it. And it's just from experience, and but we're trying to put in some low-income housing, lower-income housing. We still have money from the redevelopment set aside. When you had redevelopment, it was a law that you put 20% aside. It was called 20% set aside for low-income housing, and we were allowed to use it. We bought property to put housing on. What ended up happening is that the state said, because it was owned by a government entity, the city of Artesia, that we had to pay prevailing wage on anything, that was done there. And it's almost that, so you take the low-income housing, and the developer is saying, my margin of profit is so small that when I pay prevailing wage, I can't do low-income housing. Let me do, moderate or the higher end housing. Well, we don't need that in Artesia according to our RENA numbers, which is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment that the state does. The state tells us how many houses we have to put in our city. And so they tell us that we need to put 400 more houses, and we look around, where's our property in 1.62 square miles to put 400 more homes?
But they can't force you to do that, right?
Well, if you're not making a good faith effort, it's $10,000 fine a day.
Oh, wow.
Right. And they'll notify you. In other words, we let them know what is going on in the city of Artesia. I think we have to do a report every so many years, on what we're doing. And so I could go into so many things because we've got large lots there, but because they're zoned 1, you can have people, I'm going to say in probably our city and other cities, not Cerritos, but the people are living in garages, right? But you can't build another house on yours because it's, 1 story. I mean, there's just so many things, I don't know, there's so many rules that make it hard for us to create housing. Housing is a big issue, and I put that was really important, on the scale. So what's happening is we still don't have any low-income housing built because the money's too high. In other words, the cost of building them is too high. So we're having a hard time getting a developer to come in and do it.
Right. Looking toward the future and excluding any past or current member on your city council.
Okay.
So I'm not looking at anybody that served on the Artesia City Council. Who are the top 3 emerging leaders to watch in the LA area in the upcoming years?
In the LA area?
Yeah, like in city level, local level. If you were to say, these are 3 emerging leaders that I really like and I think will be doing a good job and they'll be influential for years to come.
Okay, in the county?
And I'm not talking about county government. I'm talking about, it could be city government, it could be state government, but that they just represent one part or another part of the county.
Well, I look to basically the LA County supervisors. I think that they have so much power.
Right.
And I think that when Don Kanabe leaves and when, who's the other one that's leaving?
Gloria Molina
Gloria
and
Molina.
Sev.
That we're going to have 3 powerhouses coming in. That's what I think.
Is there any individual person, a current council member somewhere else that you think, hey, this is a person to watch? They're going to be always influential in the city arenas, either in associations like the contract cities, or they're going to run for state legislature, or they're going to maybe even be a supervisor, that you would look at them and say, this is a person to watch? So for instance, who do you think, I know it's a little bit early, but who do you think would replace Don Kanabe for supervisor?
Well, I've heard of different people that are stepping forward. I think who has a good shot at it. If she does, is Martha Escutia.
Oh, she's, okay. And anybody else?
I'm just saying, I think that she has a lot of...
Yeah, a lot of potential, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
I've heard that she's interested in it. And
So talk to me a little bit about your decision to run for state legislature. You're on the Artesia City Council for a while, and then you decide, I want to be a state legislator. What made you to decide that, and how did that race unfold?
Okay. I'm going to try and make this quick, if I can. I went back to D.C., and it was with a women's group. And there was a woman there that was working for, at the time, or serving for the president. And I ended up sitting next to her, and she told me, she said, when you go back to California, she said, you work on a campaign at the highest level that you can find to do it. And she said, and then see what happens with your life. She said, I'm just telling you. She said, just do it. Find the highest one that you can. And I said, okay. So I went back.
But you were already a council member.
I was a council member. Oh, no, she knew that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was already on council. But she said, work for somebody at the highest level that you can do. So when I got back home, I thought, okay, I looked at all the races, what was going on. Well, at the time, Governor Gray Davis, who was lieutenant governor, so it was a while ago, was running for governor. So I called the office, his office, and asked if they could use a volunteer. And they said, and I told them I was mayor, and they said, yes, we can use you. So I went in. that's where I got involved. Well, when you work on a governor's campaign, you end up meeting a lot of individuals who are high-powered, who are very involved in Sacramento, who live in Sacramento, but we're down in LA. And anyway, what ended up happening is a couple of the men that were working on the campaign kept teasing me and saying, we're going to get you up there. We're going to get you up there with me. Well, then, I don't know, a few years went by, and I get a phone call, and it was one of these men. And he said, there's a lot of talk going on about your district down there, and we're looking for somebody. We'll run you if you'll do it.
And then that meant that was the position vacant, and it was a new position?
It was vacant. The issue where
so there would be no incumbent running, so it would make it easier.
Oh, right. There was no incumbent running. They were looking, and so I flew up there, I met with them, and then where it went bad in my mind, and I probably should have stepped down at the time, looking back at it, but there was a redistricting that went on, and we ended up with Norwalk. We didn't have Norwalk before, where
in the district.
We didn't have it, right. And so then it changed, and then we ended up with Norwalk, and there was a strong union guy that was in there, worked for CCPOA. I mean, he was part of the union, and I don't know.
What's CCPOA? The California...
Correctional Peace Officers Association.
Oh, okay. So they work for the prisons, paroles, et cetera. And then,
right, but it's very strong. They have a huge, a lot of money.
And so this individual ran and
was
won.
Successful.
And was successful.
That's right.
And then did you try it again?
I tried one more time, and
After this individual left and ran for another office.
And that was also because I was contacted by Sacramento. And there was a group in Sacramento that did not like who they were seeing that was coming in to run. And so they asked me if I would run, and they said that they would, they would back me and they would raise money, and there were a lot of promises made that did not come to fruition.
So they were not able to raise the money?
That is correct.
Okay.
I don't think they tried. I mean, in other words, I think that maybe they tried. I don't know. In other words, it was very disappointing. I'm not the only one that has gone through that. I've talked to other people where there were a lot of promises made, and it just didn't happen.
But what's the difference between you running for city council in Artesia, where, I mean, it's a much smaller city, you don't need as much money, and you know who the voters are. You could literally go and knock on every single voter's door.
And that's what I did.
Yeah, but for state assembly, you can't do that, because if you started today, it would take you many years before, by the time you touched and knocked on everybody's door. It's not possible. So you need to then communicate to voters in other ways, which typically means money, either mailing things, hiring people to go knock for you, TV, which is incredibly expensive.
Very expensive.
And so that's why you need to raise that money.
Right. And the first time I ran, there was a poll that was done, and Polanco, who was it, Marco Firebaugh? They both told me when I was up there that the poll was scary. In other words, I was too high, I was too close to their man. Okay. And so they said they threw money. They said they went to all the union. That's another thing, I'm not the union candidate. And that's the difference, a big difference between local government in most cases, well, especially in small cities where I am, there's not a lot of play there. At state level, there's huge play.
So you're running for re-election right now in Artesia. How much money are you going to spend in your campaign?
Probably $12,000.
$12,000, which is a lot of money to many people, and a lot more than was spent when you first ran. How much did you spend when you first ran for Artesia?
$400.
$400. That's it. You spent $400. What did you spend it on? A new pair of shoes after finishing walking?
Yeah. Well, you know what?
$400 and now $12,000, and
it's
when
completely changed.
Right.
And the world has changed.
Yeah.
The whole cycle has changed. Before, you could wait. I'm going to tell you, you could wait till the last couple weeks before poll voting, and then, people would send out mailers to the people. We walked, but now it's changed because more than half the people vote absentee.
Right.
And so there's 2 elections because the absentee, they're hitting this week. And so we had to have, I've got mailers. I had a door hanger go throughout the city today. I've got a mailer that's going to be hitting, and then another mailer that's going to be hitting, and then a postcard that's going to be hitting now. Then for the poll voting, doing it all over again for the poll voters.
And that's what costs the money, because you have to print this material, then you have to mail it out, or you have to walk it, and you have to pay someone to design the mailer, etc. And so that's what costs money.
Right.
So $12,000. So where does that money come from? It comes from just people that you have to call up, or you have fundraisers, and how does that system work?
I had one fundraiser. It's different. The first time I ran, of course, I could not. I didn't raise much money.
Yeah,
right?
$400. So, yeah.
So.
But there's no limits in the city of
There's
Artesia.
no limits, and we also don't have.
Matching funds or anything like that?
Oh, no, there's no matching funds, and then also we don't have term limits. So I've been on council now for 16 years. So
people know you.
Right, they know me, I know the businesses, and I mean, I have people that call and say, I want you back in, I'm going to send you a check, and they send money. The first time
I wish that would happen to me. People would just call me and say, hey, I really liked your lecture, I'm going to send you money. Now, I do get some of those offers right after the final exam, but not during the lectures.
Yeah.
Wow, so $12,000. Now, when you ran for state assembly, how much did you have to raise to be successful?
It was over 100,000.
Over.
But my competitor had, I think, like 400,000,
And so you're not thinking about running again, state assembly?
I'm not a fit for California. I'm for the legislature in California, the way it is now. It may change. I don't know. We'll see. I've done it twice. It both came down to who, in my opinion, who the union candidate was. Both cases I wasn't. One time it was CCPOA. The other one time was the CTA, which is the California Teachers Association.
Another big, strong union.
They're huge, and they're so strong, and they make sure that their people get in. They throw a lot of money at them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that we had Mayor Mario Guerra from Downey here last week. And he, of course, talked to us about he's running for the state Senate in a Democratic district. And many of the students commented that he doesn't really sound like a Democrat, a Republican, and nor does he sound like a Democrat. He's a hybrid that you hardly see in politics anymore, a very moderate Republican.
That's more me. That's where he's.
So are you a Republican?
Have a hard time. No, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a moderate, what I would consider to be a moderate Democrat, depending on the issues, but more so. And I think he's kind of the same. I think he's going to have a tough time. A
tough time in what sense? Raising money or just appealing to the voters, or in that particular district?
I think he'll raise money from the Republican, party, side of things. I think that when it comes up to Republican versus Democrat, you look back when I ran, it was 56% were Democrats. And you think, oh, the rest are Republican. No, they're not, because you've got decline to states, you have independents, you have Green Party, those all add up. And then you've got the Republican Party, I think, which was 30-something%. So if you were a Democrat running, really, you win.
Yeah.
That's the way we look at it, you win. That's what's happening now. The one thing that's changed with his, and we'll see how that goes, is that when I ran, if you were a Democrat, you couldn't vote for a Republican. If you were a Republican, you couldn't vote in the primary.
Oh, in the primary.
In the primary.
As a registered Republican, you can only vote within the Republican primary. As a registered Democrat, only in the Democratic primary. But the new law, which is called an open primary, you can vote in any one of them.
Right. So this is going to be interesting to see, because at the time, because I was more moderate, they knew a Democrat was going to win. Okay, if you think about the strategy on for the Republican people, if you know that it's going to be a Democrat, would you rather have a liberal Democrat or more moderate? They're going to want a more moderate one. So there were so many people that were saying, I'd vote for you, but I can't vote for you. Well, they can vote for Mario.
Now,
Yeah, I still think it's tough, but it'll be interesting.
So is Artesia part of that district?
Yes.
So okay. So how do you think he'll do in Artesia? Let's assume it's...
There's a candidate that is from Artesia that is running against him that right now supposedly is the front runner. So
he's a former Artesia City Council member, was on the state legislature.
That's right.
And now he's running for state Senate.
That's correct.
And so he's got high name ID in Artesia, so he's most likely going to, but Artesia is going to be a small part of the district, so it's not going to be a determining factor.
Right. I agree.
So if you were to describe your political ideology, would you consider yourself very liberal, somewhat liberal, moderate, somewhat conservative, or very conservative?
Moderate.
So you always consider yourself, and you don't think there's a role for moderate in California politics today? Certainly it doesn't seem like in
That is
national
correct.
politics. You know.
Oh, I don't think in the state either, but it may be because of my experience.
So how many years have you lived in the city of Artesia?
I'll say over 50, and that's all I'll say.
When you think about, so have you ever considered moving out of Artesia?
No.
No. So you're like they're gonna bury you
Unless
there.
I find a wonderful man, yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we're on TV, so that's why you're.
I forgot about that.
You know, I always think about. I know a lot of elected officials, especially a lot of council members throughout the county, and I always like to talk about them as being either kind of unfair categories, but I call them either regionalists or parochialists. Okay, and I would call you a regionalist, and what I mean by that is that you obviously are very concerned about the city and know everything about the city, but you're also engaged in many organizations that take a look at the broader issues. You've talked about the California Contract Cities Association, the California League of Cities. I don't know how many times I've run into you in Sacramento or at these conferences where they talk about these things. Earlier you talked about your concern about water issues that impact not only Artesia and not only LA County, but all of Southern California. Do you find that on your city council that you could do the same thing, that there's some council members that are just focused on Artesia? You try to talk about them going to a council of government meeting, what they call a COG or a rail line meeting or something like that, and they're very resistant about that?
Right.
Or are they all regionalists?
No. Some of them, they're just focused on Artesia, and they don't really venture out, much further than that.
And so of the 5 council members, you say 3 are regionalists or parochials, or what would you, are you the only regionalist in the city?
I'm going to say Victor Manalo, who's on our council, is the incoming president for Contract Cities, which is very unusual for such a small city to have 2 presidents. I was president, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, and now he's incoming president. So I would say that he's more regional, because when you sit on that board, everything's about legislation in Sacramento and how it's going to affect the cities, and then we try to bring that back to our city. So I think that I think it's important for cities to have somebody that can bring the issues back, because there are times that we'll go to contract cities and we hear about things that are happening in Sacramento. We had no idea, none. I mean, because we're in Artesia, but if you network and in other words, I think that for you to succeed, and have your business, your municipality grow, and not be, sideswiped by something else that's coming down from Sacramento. To me now, and that's why you hire, we have our lobbyists that will contact us about something, but we learn so much through these networking situations where things, somebody will say, well, this happened in our city. Or if we have an issue, they'll say, well, we had that too, but this is how we fixed it. And then, we'll look at that.
So best practices, experience, and you don't have to go through all the troubles that other cities have gone through, or they've already solved it. Why try to reinvent the wheel, as they say, that somebody's already done that? Just take that and be able to apply it to the city.
Right.
So, but I like the idea that you say that in a council of 5, not everybody has to be a regionalist. As long as you have 1 or 2, that's enough to be able to bring that information back to the city and have that occur. So I know that you've always wanted to come to Loyola Marymount University.
Yes,
I know that
I'm very happy to be here.
that she went to Pepperdine,
Yes.
but she's always wanted to be at Loyola Marymount University. I understand that. So in terms of we talked earlier, and you mentioned about education being the #1 priority for so many different elected officials. What can a city do to help with education? What can the city of Artesia do, or does it have any responsibility?
There are 2 of us, and it happens to be Victor Manalo and myself, who are the liaisons between the city of Artesia and ABC Unified School District, which is our district, our school district that governs our, the children there. And in the past, we didn't have an ad hoc committee. Well, we had one, but there was no movement. We didn't do anything. Well, there is now a new superintendent, and so we approached her and asked if we could start having meetings. And then we started letting her know what we saw that was going on in our city. And again, we don't have a university. We don't have a college. We don't even have a high school. Our high school is actually in Cerritos, and so our people go there.
So wait a minute, there's an Artesia High School.
Artesia High School is located in Lakewood.
Oh, okay. So no wonder we get so confused in Los Angeles with about different things are located. So let me get this straight. Artesia High School is located in Lakewood, not in
correct.
Artesia. But is it part of the ABC school district?
Yes.
Okay, at least that part I got. Okay. So but independent, the school district is independent, has a much larger budget than the city of Artesia.
That is correct.
Artesia City Council has no formal control or impact on the school district. And so how do you try to help the school district out?
What we put in place is that now we get updates from the city, from ABC, where we didn't get them before. We're invited to, the events that they're having, which we weren't invited. So in other words, there's a lot more engagement between the two. And when we see that there's an issue or a constituent tells us about an issue and that they're not addressing it, then we go, just and talk. And we have a relationship, with them. So I think it enhances. I think it's much better now than it was in the past.
Yeah, so you talked about education being one of the top issues. You also talked about housing being an important issue. And you've had the opinion that most residents of Artesia probably couldn't afford a house in Artesia. And you see that in a lot of cities. So what's the future of housing and people getting houses in Artesia?
That's why I think we need more low-income and moderate housing. I couldn't afford my house now. I mean, if I wasn't living in my house and I decided to buy, I could not afford my house that I live in. And so the people who don't have a house there, I think that our medium housing prices is around $350,000. And I think that it is very hard for many of our people to buy a house. And if they were going to buy, they would go somewhere else. But they like living here, they like the school district. We're next to 2 freeways. We've got the beach, not very far. I mean, it's a good place to live. And so they rent there, and they're happy. I mean, I talk to them, they say, well, we'd rather do this than go buy a house somewhere else. But if we had the housing there, the lower income housing, and that it was monitored and we could get some of these people in. We're even looking at having a veterans housing program there to help out veterans. There's a program right now that the state has, CalVet, and they have, I mean, it's like $900 million. I don't know. I mean, in other words, it's just huge, but it's getting. So we're working with them, but we do have some land that we're trying to build some low-income housing on. That hopefully, if there's a way, and we did talk about this, could we get our people in there first? Yeah.
So we consider Artesia a mature city, meaning that it's been around for a while.
Oh yeah.
And most of the land in Artesia is currently being used for one way or another. Right. And so there is, like you mentioned earlier, there's really very little vacant land.
Right.
So when you need to build something, you have to knock something down.
Right.
And that creates, or am I mistaken, are there available lots in Artesia that could be developed for low-income housing or senior housing or veterans housing?
In trying to be creative, the property that we did buy was near a cul-de-sac, so we condemned the cul-de-sac and then
created more land.
Right. So that creates more land. It was the city was able to do that, and that did create more land. But yeah, we look around. There's another piece that it's kind of interesting. One of the largest steel manufacturers in the world bought a piece of property in Artesia, and it's like a quadrant out of this block. And anyway, they said the reason that they bought there was because they did the demographics in our area, and it's right. Cerritos is, I don't know, over 60% Asian, but anyway, high density Asian in our area, and that's why they bought. They haven't developed, but I had put it in there that they're going to develop it, and so
they haven't given you an idea what they want to put there.
The city, well,
is it housing? Is it retail?
Mixed
is it
use.
Okay.
They want to do a mixed use, and so on the front edge on Artesia Boulevard, it would be commercial retail, that type, service and
Right.
professional, and then behind it, maybe above it, and behind it would be, they said, senior housing, low-income housing, something like that.
So very early on when we started talking, you talked about that you went to a city council meeting with your parents, and your mom was telling you that you could do that. And you mentioned that the council was all male. Were you the first female council member?
I was the third. There was a woman, there were two other women. That
But
were
at the same time?
No.
So when you got into office, though, you were the one female and 4 males.
Yes.
Yeah. And how did you think as a female that you had a certain responsibility to bring up certain subject matters?
No, but I think my perspective sometimes was different than theirs.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I don't know. I think it was different having a woman on the council, but I didn't really, bring up women's issues per se. We have an agenda, that we go through, but no, I don't think so. I mean, I wouldn't. Looking back, I don't think that they were thinking, she's always talking about the women. No.
But you did, like you said, you had a different perspective
yeah.
on different issues. What about being Latino or Latina? Were you the first Latina on the city council? And what about that? Did you feel a certain obligation to bring up certain issues, or at least how the issues were discussed in the narrative?
No. The one thing that kind of set me apart, I think, from the men, and it wasn't a good thing, I would say, is that when it came time and it was my turn to become mayor pro tem, vice mayor, we call it mayor pro tem, they did not. They didn't move me forward.
So
I stayed as a council, but it wasn't just me. Araceli Gonzalez and Blanca Figueroa.
Right.
I mean, there were 3 of us that, kind of hung out at different things, and we were all excited because we were all going to be mayor pro tem together. None of us got in.
So
None.
let me kind of contextualize this for the students. So there's 5 city council members. 1 is mayor, 1 is vice mayor, and then the other 3 are council members. They really all have the same amount of responsibilities and duties, et cetera. The mayor and vice mayor have some ceremonial responsibilities, and most importantly, the mayor can set the agenda. And that's the greatest power that a mayor in these rotating mayor systems have. And so that informally, it's always been, many cities just say, hey, we rotated. You're mayor this year, so-and-so's mayor pro tem this year, but next year will be mayor, and so-and-so becomes pro tem, and they just rotated.
Right.
That they had always rotated it, and when it came to your turn, they said no.
I know, I was shocked. It was terrible. My relatives were here from all over the place,
To come and see you become mayor pro tem?
and it didn't happen, yeah.
And
Yeah, it was
so you
not
had no
nice.
inkling that they were going to say no?
No, I think I did because I remember telling them beforehand, I'd like for you to come. I don't know how it's going to go, but I mean, it's my turn, to be moved forward, and then it didn't happen.
So what explanation did they use to prevent the only woman, the Latina, from becoming mayor pro tem when they had done it for years in a row?
They didn't really provide any. I was not happy, when that happened. But when I did talk to them, one of them said, because I think he felt bad, he said, "You'll get it next time. I promise. You will get it next time." It was like he was trying to, placate me. You will get it next. And he said, "But I mean it. You will." It's like, okay, I don't know.
Why not this time? I mean, it's like.
Well, he said I couldn't get the guys, to go along with it, but I don't know. I don't really know what to tell you other than it wasn't only me. There were other women that.
In other cities at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. I actually remember that situation. But what happened next time? Did you become mayor pro tem next time?
Yes, I did become mayor pro tem the next time,
But what was the difference? Were they just trying to say, hey, we have control over this, we're just going to purposely put you off 1 year?
I think that there was a man who wanted to become mayor when it was re-election time. It is much nicer to run for re-election when you're mayor of the city. It is. And so if I came in, I think he was counting forward and thinking he's not going to be mayor when I'll be mayor. I would be mayor or something. In other words, I think that was it. They didn't want me to be mayor when it was time to run again. and this man wanted to be mayor, I think that was the whole thing. And so then the other guy, you know, the one council member, he said, I promise, and he was one of the most seasoned one that was on there, and I know he felt bad. But anyway, so yeah, I went through that.
Okay. So now I'm going to give the students opportunities to ask questions. They're all going to have to be doing these type of interviews with mayors. And let me ask anybody, is there a particular a question or that anybody has that would like to ask? Carlos.
Okay, let me just think about how I'm going to word it. Okay, so you mentioned how you were trying to boost the small businesses by beautification, like trying to make it more appealing to customers. What about like the tax burden that small business owners are going through to hire new employees? What is Artesia like doing to lower the tax burden on
the tax burden?
Yeah.
We really don't have.
Okay, but is there a business is there a business tax in Artesia? So like, for instance, the city of LA has a business tax. And so if you set up shop in Artesia, you don't have to pay an annual permit fee or an annual business license fee?
No, oh yes, they have to pay a business license fee, yes.
And how much is that typically?
Well,
and is it determined by the size of the business, or is it just a flat rate for any business?
It is now a flat rate. Before it was based on how many employees you had, and what was happening is that a lot of the mom and pops were saying, well, I don't employ anybody, so we got nothing, you know, from them. So it changed. We went to the voters because of Prop 216. I don't know if they know about Prop 216. It was a bill that was passed that requires local government to take it to the vote if you're going to raise any kind of taxes. Because before, what they were saying, I wasn't involved because Prop 216 came into being right when I got on. It was like in the 90s.
98, I think.
It was in 98.
Yeah.
And so even for business license, we couldn't raise it. Or transit occupancy tax, we can't raise that. I mean, it all has to...
Transit occupancy tax is hotel tax.
Right. We couldn't raise that. So anyway, we go to the people. There is a tax that Artesia has that is unique to anybody. No other city has it that we know of, and it was called Measure V. And basically, the Indian community, South Asian, came to us. That their whole corridor right there is all commercial general. So they were saying, we're not balanced. We have no travel agencies, no insurance, no dry cleaners, I mean, whatever. All these things that there's no tax. I'm not sure about the dry cleaning, if that's tax or not. But anyway, all the services, and they wanted to have it there. And so the city was saying, no, you can't, because then we're not going to get any tax. So then they said, well, what if we pay like an in lieu, you know, fee, and say, okay, well, because I want to have my travel agency in the middle, which they make money in the middle of this corridor, so they do pay this tax.
Okay, so let me get this straight. There's a corridor, Pioneer Avenue or Boulevard. Pioneer Boulevard, where there's been a tremendous amount of Indian businesses that have emerged. Right. Okay, they actually decided to tax themselves to allow different types of businesses to also move in there.
Right.
And they did that. So this was the business community coming and saying, go ahead and tax us, which is very, very unusual.
It is unusual.
But it happens in a lot of what we call business development improvement districts or things of that.
Yeah. We don't have one. We don't have one of those.
You don't have one
We'd
of those.
We'd like to have one, but we don't have it.
But you need to have the vote of the people to be able to do that. So one of the key things that we're trying to figure out in these surveys that we're doing is the degree to which the smaller cities matter in the larger economic scheme of things. I would imagine, and I don't have data, but Carlos is going to have this data when he writes his paper, that the number of people who live in Artesia who also work in Artesia, and that number has to be very small.
It is.
I would say
it's small.
Yeah, that most people who live in Artesia actually work somewhere else. And that's the case just about everywhere else. That's not unique to Artesia. Okay. It's something that tends to happen almost everywhere, that there are bedroom communities, there are resident, there are commercial communities, there are manufacturing communities, and different cities tend to have this type of focus. And so when a city like Artesia thinks about economic development, they think differently than a city like Long Beach or a city like Santa Fe Springs or Vernon or Commerce or City of Industry.
Right.
They're all very different. But are there some common regional issues that cities tend to think about, especially when you talk about contract cities? What are the common issues that, irrespective of size, of being residential or commercial, that cities tend to think about?
One is transportation, and I know that when Mayor Villaraigosa, was in office, he contacted all of the cities, and what he was trying to do was a regional strategy to, and I don't know, there was a wording for it, but basically it was to align or synchronize the lights. And other cities in other states have done this, and our city, we calibrate our lights, and then Cerritos calibrates their lights, and then Lakewood does, and in other words,
but they're not coordinated.
Yeah, but they're not coordinated, and so it just it adds to the congestion, traffic congestion. And so he brought out, there was a study that was done, and that we should do this, and I don't know that it was ever done. I don't know. But in other words, that type of thing I think would be valuable, that we can all work together on it.
And is there much competition between your city and other cities in terms of economic development, that you want, like a Home Depot is looking for property or something like that, and they say, hey, Artesia, we're willing to come if you give us some land, and then another city says, well, not only will we give you land, we'll actually give you some of the property tax back.
Yeah, that was happening a lot with redevelopment. But I'm going to say no, not so much in Artesia, just simply because we're so small.
Right.
We don't have, the acres that they would need. So, for example, we think an IKEA, something like that, would do well. We have, some different things that we've thought about. They need too many acres. We just don't have the land. So that was just one that I was mentioning. But so I would say no. The one thing that I know that our Indian community is real nervous about is that there are small ones popping up. In other words, like a cluster of Indian, and they're just afraid. I mean, what if it happens in Irvine? In an area in Irvine, and then everybody starts going there, or Diamond Bar, or wherever. So,
but Artesia would have. So what you're saying is that Artesia's been able to build, for whatever reason, this incredibly thriving Indian commercial strip, and the owners of those businesses and the property owners of those businesses are greatly invested in that, and they're all doing very well, making money. They're concerned about what if something competes with that, another Indian center somewhere else.
Well, it's begun.
Yeah,
it has begun.
Where?
10 years ago, there was no Indian. You can find an Indian store now in Irvine. There's
what can you guys do?
in Anaheim.
What can you guys do about it? There's nothing you can really do about it
Well,
as a
so
city.
that's why we're bringing a movie theater, and they want a temple. They want things that are going to. There's no temple, which is unbelievable. It's like the city of Norwalk has 3 temples, I think, Indian temples. We don't have one in the city of Artesia, but so things like that.
Those type of things. Oh, okay. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for taking the time, helping us out with the survey, and then also talking to the students. It was great. Mayor Sally Zuniga Flowers, thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.